Have you ever been playing a game of Commander, and you have the win locked up, but then you think to yourself, I don't want to win the game this way. What if you had the option to win the game, not 20 different ways, but 36 different ways? That's right, there are 36 cards in Magic the Gathering that say you win the game, and in this deck, we're playing all of them. Yes, even Battle of Wits and Hedron alignment. And outside of those two cards, it is actually possible to pull off the win with every single one of the alternate win conditions. Since I last discussed this deck, there have been 7 new alternate win conditions printed, which means the deck has undergone some pretty big changes. The deck is basically the other side of the coin when compared to my Kenrith deck, which has every card that says you lose the game. In order to play all of these cards, we need to be playing a 5-color commander. There are a few options that could work well for the deck, but the one that I've chosen, and the one that I think is the best, is Garth One-Eye. Garth is the perfect commander for this deck for a few reasons. Firstly, he's 5 colors, but also he has this cool activated ability which is extremely useful in this deck. You see, with so many alternate win condition cards being included in the deck, as well as all of the cards which are necessary to make those win conditions actually work, there is very little room in the deck to play cards which are traditionally good. That's where Garth comes in. Garth's activated ability gives you access to 6 different spells, all of which are very relevant. Well, maybe one of them isn't too relevant actually. Playing Garth as your commander is kind of like being able to play a deck with 6 extra cards in it. You can tap Garth to make a copy of either Disenchant, Brain Geyser, Terror, Shivan Dragon, Regrowth, or Black Lotus. All of these spells can be very useful at various points in the game, and they serve the purpose of being able to play things like removal or card draw when we otherwise wouldn't have room in the deck for those kinds of effects. Now, on to the alternate win conditions. As I mentioned, there are 36 of them, which is a lot, so we're going to group some of them together into similarly themed ways to win. We'll start off with what are likely the most played alternate win conditions in Commander, which are the self-mill cards. These are Thassa's Oracle, Laboratory Maniac, and Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. These are generally the easiest win conditions to pull off because all you need to do is pair them with a card like Demonic Consultation to mill yourself out. We're going to get into some much spicier Wincons as we go though. Next are the cards which care about having multiple copies of things or a certain number of things, and there are actually a few new cards here that we're going to discuss. In this category we have Biovisionary, Central Elevator, Liliana's Contract, Halo Fountain, Epic Struggle, and Gallifrey Stands. With some of these cards, it's literally not possible for us to win unless we help them out by using some kind of copy effects. That's the case with Biovisionary, which says at the beginning of your end step, if you control 4 or more creatures named Biovisionary, you win the game. We can only be playing 1 copy of Biovisionary in our deck though, so we'll need to find a way to copy it. We have a few different ways to do this, but the best way is with a new card from Tarkir Dragonstorm in Naga Fleshcrafter. As long as we have Biovisionary and at least 3 other creatures, we can just activate Naga Fleshcrafter's ability from the graveyard and basically win that way. Doppelgang is another card that can work great here, as well as Clever Impersonator and Mirror Room. Another one of these Wincons is Central Elevator, which is a fairly recent card out of Duskmourn, and it says we win the game if we control 8 or more different names among unlocked doors of rooms we control. That means we need to be playing at least 4 room cards because each has 2 doors, which gives us the 8 different named rooms we need. For the rooms we need in this deck, I've tried to choose ones which can help us out with making other win conditions work, or at least help us in more generic ways. We have the previously mentioned Mirror Room, which can make copies of things, or the Fractured Realm side, which can double up our triggered abilities. There's also Walk-in Closet, that can let us play lands from the graveyard, or Forgotten Cellar, which allows us to cast spells from our graveyard, which is a very useful effect to have, meaning if a card we need to make Wincon work ends up in the graveyard, it isn't necessarily a lost cause. And then we have Restricted Office, which is a board wipe effect, and Lecture Hall, which can give our other permanents hexproof. We also have Liliana's Contract, which is a Wincon that wants us to control 4 differently named demons. When I originally made this deck, I actually included 4 different demons, but since then I've switched to the strategy of including cards such as Maskwood Nexus and Arcane Adaptation to be able to control just any 4 creatures and then just give them the demon creature type, which I think is a more reliable strategy. These cards also go a long way to making Gallifrey Stands work, because there is no way we'd be able to fit 13 Doctors in the deck and still have it reasonably work. Instead, we can just have any 13 creatures and then give them the Doctor creature type. Getting 13 creatures might be a bit difficult, So we're playing March of the Multitudes in order to be able to create a large number of creatures at instant speed. March of the Multitudes also works quite well with another Wincon in Halo Fountain, which needs us to be able to untap 15 tapped creatures. And another card that March works quite well with is Epic Struggle, which just needs us to control 20 or more creatures during our upkeep in order to win. The next category of win conditions includes cards which care about our life total. This includes Felidar Sovereign, Near-Death Experience, Test of Endurance, Celestial Convergence, and Happily Ever After. Felidar Sovereign says on our upkeep we win the game if we have 40 or more life. In Commander you start at 40 life, so if you can somehow just play this card, not lose life, and then make it to your next upkeep, you win. But it's usually not quite that easy. It does have lifelink though, which can be pretty useful. Similarly, we also have Test of Endurance, which says at the beginning of our upkeep, if we have 50 or more life, we win. We're also playing Near-Death Experience, which says at the beginning of our upkeep, if we have exactly 1 life, we win. So with this card, we don't actually want to be gaining life, but it does care about what our life total is. And then there is Celestial Convergence, which says it comes into play with 7 Omen counters on it. Then on our upkeep, we remove an Omen counter from it, and if there are no Omen counters left, then the player with the highest life total wins the game. This can actually end up in a draw as well though, if 2 or more players are tied for the highest life total. Lastly is Happily Ever After, which is actually a pretty easy alternate win con to pull off. It says when it enters, each player gains 5 life and draws a card. Then on your upkeep, if there are 5 colors among permanents we control, there are 6 or more card types among permanents we control or in our graveyard, and our life total is greater than or equal to our starting life total, we win the game. It's pretty easy to meet the color requirement for this card since Garth alone provides all 5 colors. In order to help with all these cards that want us to gain life, we're playing this card right here, Revival and Revenge. Mainly we're playing it for the revenge part, which says we double our life total and target opponent loses half their life total, but the revival part can be pretty useful too to rebuy a creature from the graveyard. Next up, we have the alternate win conditions that care about counters. These cards include Darksteel Reactor, Azor's Elocutors, Helix Pinnacle, Simic Ascendancy, 20-Toed Toad, and Call the Spirit Dragons. Darksteel Reactor says at the beginning of our upkeep, put a charge counter on it, and when it has 20 or more charge counters, we win. There's also Azor's Elocutors, which says at the beginning of our upkeep, we put a filibuster counter on it, then if it has 5 or more filibuster counters on it, we win. However, whenever a source deals damage to you, remove a filibuster counter from it. So this one is actually very hard to pull off. This is one that I have yet to do. Helix Pinnacle though is not very hard to pull off, and I've won multiple times with it. It's just a 1 mana enchantment and it has Shroud. It says you can pay X to put X tower counters on it. At the beginning of your upkeep, if it has 100 or more tower counters on it, you win the game. There's also Simic Ascendancy, which says you can pay 3 mana and put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control. Whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on a creature you control, put that many growth counters on Simic Ascendancy. At the beginning of your upkeep, if it has 20 or more growth counters on it, you win the game. Then we've got 20-Toed Toad, which is a newer win con that is quite easy to win with. It's a 4 mana 3/3 frog wizard that says your maximum hand size is 20. When you attack with 2 or more creatures, put a +1/+1 counter on 20-Toed Toad and draw a card. Whenever it attacks, you win the game if there are 20 or more counters on it, or if you have 20 or more cards in your hand. And then there's this card which is quite new out of Tarkir Dragonstorm, Call the Spirit Dragons. It's a 5 mana enchantment that says dragons you control have indestructible. At the beginning of your upkeep, for each color, put a +1/+1 counter on a dragon you control of that color. If you put +1/+1 counters on 5 dragons this way, you win the game. Now for these win cons that care about counters, there are a few cards we're playing to help them work. First of all, we have a pair of cards in the deck which allows us to generate infinite mana. This is the Vizier of Remedies and Devoted Druid combo. If you have a Vizier out, you can tap and untap Devoted Druid as many times as you want to make infinite green mana, which is a pretty easy way to win with Helix Pinnacle. Also, for cards that want counters placed on them, a great way to get those counters is by proliferating. We've included a copy of Lulu Stern Guardian for this reason. With Lulu, we can pay 3 and a blue to proliferate. If we have infinite mana, we could theoretically proliferate infinitely. However, our infinite mana is green, not blue, so that does put a restriction on the number of times we can proliferate. But I actually like Lulu in this deck just to play it fairly and proliferate once or twice per turn, and also because of her other ability, which says whenever an opponent attacks you, choose an attacking creature and put a stun counter on it. so she is a pretty good deterrent against attackers as well. For Call the Spirit Dragons, we have a few cards to help it out. There is the previously mentioned Maskwood Nexus and Arcane Adaptation to make sure we can have 5 dragons, but we're also playing Leyline of the Guild Pact as a way to ensure that we have all 5 colors of dragons. Leyline actually helps this deck out in many ways. The deck is very color restrictive, so being able to start the game with a Leyline in play can go a long way to making the deck work. But there's another alternate Wincon which recently came off the ban list, which Leyline works very well with. That card is Coalition Victory, which we definitely have in this deck. It's an 8-mana sorcery that says you win the game if you control a land of each basic land type and a creature of each color, so Leyline of the Guild Pact is a natural fit with it. The next group of Wincons will be the ones that care about artifacts. This includes Revel in Riches, Hellkite Tyrant, and Mechanized Production. These cards are all great because none of them require you to do anything special or play any other cards in order to make them work. They are all self-sustaining Wincons that are just good on their own. I guess with Mechanized Production you need an artifact to go with it, but it can be literally any artifact. Revel in Riches says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you make a treasure token. On your upkeep, if you control 10 or more treasures, you win the game. You can have a Revel in Riches in play and just play the game out naturally, and eventually you get to 10 treasures and just win the game. Hellkite Tyrant can gain control of artifacts that opponents control when it deals combat damage to them, and then on your upkeep, if you control 20 or more treasures, you win the game. And Mechanized Production lets us make a copy of an enchanted artifact on our upkeep. Then if we control 8 or more artifacts with the same name, we win. Notably, they don't have to have the name of the artifact which is enchanted, so if we just control something like 8 treasures, then we win. One card that works really well with all of these Wincons here is Doppelgang, because it allows us to create a bunch of copies of artifacts, which is exactly what these cards want. Now, for the rest of the Wincons, I'm just going to go through them one by one, because they're all kind of unique and I'm not exactly sure how to categorize them together. So we have Mael's Aria here, which puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control during our upkeep, and then eventually, if we have a creature with 20 or more power, we win the game. This is another card that just kind of works on its own and doesn't really need much help, although there are ways to help it, like proliferating for example. We also have, which is actually a very hard win to pull off in this deck. It says at the beginning of our upkeep, if we have 20 or more creature cards in our graveyard, we win. However, this deck only has 22 creatures in it, including the commander. This is because so many of the Wincons we're playing are non-creatures, and we also need to be playing enough cards to make all of those Wincons work, to the point where there just isn't room in the deck to really be playing many creatures. But we have 22, so it is theoretically possible to win with this card. Next is Approach of the Second Sun, which probably doesn't need much explanation because it's another one of those cards which is pretty popular in Commander. You don't need to do anything to make it work, you just cast it and then cast it when you get 7 cards deeper into your deck and you win. Next, we have a couple of cards here that are pretty similar. There is Ramses, Assassin Lord, and Xenos Gelvis. Both of these cards say that when someone loses, we win. Ramses wants someone to lose after they've been attacked by an assassin, although Ramses is an assassin, so that works by itself. And Xenos can flip over into Shinryu, which lets us choose an opponent, and then when that opponent loses, we win. So to win, we just need to make someone lose. The next Wincon is one that I like a lot, mostly because of how it combos with one other card in this deck, and I've pulled off this combo multiple times. This is Barren Glory, which is an enchantment that says at the beginning of our upkeep, if we control no permanents other than Barren Glory, and have no cards in hand, we win the game. Well, there is a card that lets us fulfill these requirements perfectly. That card is Decree of Annihilation. Decree is a 10-mana sorcery that says exile all artifacts, creatures, lands, graveyards, and hands from the game. You might have noticed that it does not say enchantments. So if you have Barren Glory in play and you resolve a Decree of Annihilation, you win, because the only thing you'll have left is Barren Glory. Your opponents won't have any permanents, hands, or graveyards left, so there is no way they'll be able to answer the Barren Glory at that point. Next, we do have a couple of coin flipping / dice rolling Wincons in the deck. We're playing Chance Encounter and Luck Bobblehead. These are two pretty difficult Wincons to make work, but we can do it. For Chance Encounter, we need to be able to flip coins, so we have a copy of Mirror March in the deck, which is actually a pretty good card in its own right. And then for Luck Bobblehead, it wants us to be playing a bunch of bobbleheads although there just isn't room in the deck to include that many bobbleheads, so our plan with this is just to make copies of Luck Bobblehead with things like Doppelgang or Clever Impersonator, and hope to get lucky with our dice rolls. The next Wincon is one that's very easy to win with. This is Triskaidekaphile. This card just needs us to have 13 cards in our hand during our upkeep. Fortunately though, it says we have no maximum hand size. I guess this one is pretty similar actually to 20-Toed Toad, and both of them are very good cards that don't need much help to get working. Now, there are just 2 Wincons left to go over, and I've saved these for last because it's not possible to win with them. These are Battle of Wits and Hedron Alignment. Battle of Wits says at the beginning of our upkeep, if we have 200 or more cards in our library, we win. In Commander, the deck is limited to exactly 100 cards. Well, 99 after you discount the Commander. That means though that it is impossible to make Battle of Wits work. Hedron Alignment says at the beginning of our upkeep, we can reveal our hand, and then we win if we have a card named Hedron Alignment in exile, in our hand, in our graveyard, and on the battlefield. As far as I know, there is no way to make Hedron Alignment work in Commander. So Battle of Wits does literally nothing in the deck, but at least with Hedron Alignment, we can have it in play and pay 2 mana to scry 1, that's okay, right? These cards might be useless, but the rule for this deck is that I must play every card that specifically says I win the game, which both of these cards do, so I'm playing them because I'm not a coward. So that's all of the alternate Wincons, but there are still other cards in the deck. We do have a tiny bit of room in the deck to be playing generically good cards. I've included a copy of Demonic Tutor to help find cards that might work with whichever Wincon we're going for at any point. There's also both Eternal Witness and Timeless Witness. I've included both of these because I found it very useful to be able to re-buy things out of the graveyard with this deck. For a lot of our Wincons, we need a very specific set of cards to make them work, so if one piece of the puzzle ends up in the graveyard, that just shuts off that Wincon. Next we'll go over the ramp that we have in the deck, of which we're playing a decent amount. We're playing some Artifact ramp in Soul Ring, Arcane Signet, and Chromatic Lantern. The Lantern is particularly important because of the color restrictions in the deck. For land ramp, we have Nature's Lore, 3 Visits, and Open the Way. And for creature ramp, we have Birds of Paradise, Devoted Druid, Kiora's Follower, Bloom Tender, and Dryad of the Elysian Grove. Kiora's Follower is an inclusion you might not see in a lot of decks, but I actually like it a lot here because not only is it ramp, it can also allow us to untap Garth so that we can reuse his ability. And that's all for the spells in the deck, so now on to the lands. There's actually one win condition which I didn't mention before, and you might have noticed that. That's because it is also a land. That's right, we are of course playing Maze's End. In order to make it work though, that means we need to be playing a bunch of gates. And we have 12 gates total, including a mix of guild gates and gates from Baldur's Gate. The best one of these gates by far though is Gond Gate because it says, gates we control enter the battlefield untapped, and it can also even tap to add 1 mana of any color a gate we control could produce. And then we've even got a Thran Portal too. Seeing as this is a 5-color deck, we have a good number of lands that can tap to add a mana of any color. We have City of Brass, Forbidden Orchard, Reflecting Pool, Plaza of Heroes, Mana Confluence, Talon Gates of Madara, Command Tower, and Exotic Orchard. We're actually only playing 3 fetch lands in the deck in Misty Rainforest, Scalding Tarn, and Verdant Catacombs, and to go with our fetch lands we have a total of 1 Shockland, Breeding Pool. However, we do have 5 Triomes though. We have Ketria Triome, Savai Triome, Zagoth Triome, Xander's Lounge, and Zayator's Proving Ground. Because we don't have much room in the deck for generically good spells, we fit a few of those effects into our land base with some of the channel lands. We have a Boseiju Who Endures, Igonjo Seat of the Empire, and Otawara Soaring City. And then lastly, for our basic lands, we have a forest. And that is the deck. This is a deck that I've played quite a lot, and it's very fun to play. Pretty much every game you play is going to be different from the last one. I originally made this deck back in 2023, and it's one that I have to make changes to whenever a new alternate Wincon gets printed. It's cool to try and go for the different Wincons depending on how the game plays out, because your opponents might think you're trying to go one way, but then actually you have something completely different in mind. And it's worth mentioning that, yes, this deck is very similar to the 20 Ways to Win Secret Lair deck, but that deck only has 20 ways to win. This one has 36. So mathematically speaking, this deck is 45% better than the Secret Lair deck. That's just how things work, isn't it? Let me know what you think of the deck though. If you have any suggestions, I'd be happy to read them. And once again, I'll mention that you can find the full deck list as well as a link to my Mox Field and all of my other decks in the video description below. If you follow the link, it helps me out, and also if you're looking to buy any Magic cards, definitely check out mtgnorth.ca and use code 8thPlaceDave at the checkout to save 5% on your order of any trading card singles. MTG North is a great supporter of the channel, and you can find their store linked below as well. Everyone should come join my Discord server, where we have channels like the Deck Brewing channel where we talk about decks like this. And in the description below, you can also find my Patreon, where I have the Token of the Month tier, where I send out a new custom foil token to patrons every month. I'd like to thank all of my supporters on Patreon though. Otherwise though, thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.